Good evening and a very warm welcome to this Founding Fuel Masterclass on the future of the MBA. My name is Ajit Gupta. I'm a co-founder at Founding Fuel. This is an important conversation for obvious reasons. Back in 2010, when Srikant Datar and his colleagues wrote this book, Rethinking the MBA, business education, they said, was at the crossroad. It was a landmark book because this offered a very in-depth look at the state of management and business education and a blueprint for the future. Fast forward to 2020. We're at the crossroad again, thanks to a global pandemic and a national and an international lockdown of sorts. And we've got a very stellar panel, and I'll come to that in just a bit. But this isn't just a conversation, a standalone conversation this evening. We've done what you'd call slow cooking. So for the last 3.5 weeks, almost 4 weeks or so, we've been kind of giving shape to how we want to run this conversation from an Indian lens, because that's the key, really, in some ways. And we've had conversations within the Founding Fuel community and with each of our 4 stellar panelists and our anchor this evening. And I'll quickly give you a sense of what we've done. So, as I was mentioning, this conversation's been on for a while. We exchanged notes on email. We had separate conversations with each of our panelists. And we also did something different this time, which is that we had 2 breakout sessions planned in the run-up to the masterclass. The objective being that we would be able to frame and distill the conversations and the issues that are really germane to today's conversation. And I think it's to my mind, you'll see the difference, because it's a complex subject. There are multiple issues at stake. So we've kind of used this occasion to try and kind of unpack some of the stuff and bring it back into this conversation as well. So without much ado, I will first, I think, introduce the 4 panelists, and then I'll come to the breakout group members and our chairs as well. None of the 4 panelists really need any introduction, so I won't get into long introductions. We've got Srikant Datar, who's, of course, the author, the co-author of this book that I spoke to you about. Srikant, welcome to this session. Thank you so much. You're joining from Boston, I know, early in the morning. And I'd come to you, Nitin Paranjpe, the Global CEO at Unilever. And welcome, Nitin. Ajit Rangnekar, who used to be the former dean at ISB, the Indian School of Business in Hyderabad, had a long stint there. Welcome, Ajit.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And finally, Pramath Sinha, whom I've known for many years now, who's done some incredible things, including helping set up ISB and then moving quickly on to, if you please, 3 different higher education ventures: Vedica, Scholars Program, Harappa, now more recently, and before that, of course, the Ashoka University. So welcome, Pramath.
Thank you.
There are 3 or 4 things that are common, actually. I didn't get into long introductions, but there are 3 or 4 things that are common to all of them. One is that most of them are products of the Indian higher education system. Most of them have graduated from the leading business schools as well. And also, I think they've very clearly reached the pinnacle of their professional careers as well. At Harvard Business School, at ISB, at Unilever, and at McKinsey, and later in many of the ventures that Pramath has founded. And therefore, the contribution to management and business is significant. And what's more, we found that their willingness to really learn and that learning mindset that we so seek at Founding Fuel was in ample evidence when we kind of interacted with them over the last few weeks. So thank you so much, gentlemen. We're looking forward to this conversation. I'll come back and talk a bit about the conversation that we've had within the community with some leaders from our community, the Founding Fuel community, which resulted in 2 breakout sessions on the 25th and the 24th of June. And the first one was chaired by Baba Prasad, who joins us from the US as well. Baba, welcome to this session.
Thank you. Thank you.
In his panel, yes, Prasad, thanks so much. We've also had, there was Arun Mehra, again, all familiar faces for Founding Fuel community members, Kiran Karnik, Sanjoy Bhattacharya, and Arup Mazumdar. I'd like to welcome all of you. Thank you for joining. I'll also like to introduce the second breakout group as well, who with us, Professor Rishikesha Krishna, who chaired the second breakout group. Hi, Rishi. He had Harshvardhan, Piyul Mukherjee, Haresh Chawla, and Saikat Chaudhary joining us also from the US. So in some ways, you couldn't have asked for a better recipe in some ways. So let's see, I'm sure the slow cooking would have worked. We've also got a very large audience digitally. And to my colleague, Avi Arasu, who's our Director Learning and Change at Founding Fuel, to give you a sense of how this session is planned, and also to introduce our anchor for the evening, Meeta Sengupta. Over to you, Kavi.
Thank you, Ajay, and welcome everyone to this session. This is part of a continuing conversation that we are having at Founding Fuel. I call it continuing because it's not a one-off event. We've been having such conversations in the past, and we are very conscious about the fact that these can't be events when you need to shift what's ingrained as part of how we have thought about a few things. We need to think about things very differently, which means we need to apply our minds and thinking over a period of time. So over the last few weeks, our 4 panelists and over 10 senior professionals that Indrajit listed just now have been engaged in a conversation, and the Founding Fuel community in the background has been working on this as well. The quest has been to find the balance between, just the right balance between width and depth, just so that you're not left with certainty, but you're left with a little bit of doubt, a lot of ideas, some thoughts, and some questions that you can possibly go back with and interact and continue the conversation. We've got hundreds of registrations today, so welcome everybody. And we've got to also recognize the fact that the MBA is we're just not reshaping the MBA, but we are also thinking about the practice of management and how that is reshaping all our thought as well. This is relevant for several of us. If you're a faculty in business school, if you're a professional who's considering going to campus sometime, if you're a professional who seeks to go back and teach sometime, for all of us, it's going to be relevant for different reasons. So for all of us here on the Zoom session, and for all others who logged in through YouTube, Facebook, and any other place through which you're getting it live streamed, welcome again. I'll quickly come to the design of the session. This design is fast-paced, as what Indrajit was speaking earlier of. It's more like soccer. The idea is to keep the ball in play, keep passing the ball between our panelists and our thought leaders here. And the idea is to keep the ball in motion so that we cover as much ground as possible. Our role in Founding Fuel here is to hold an inclusive space for conversation. We hope to we have the audience on YouTube, on Facebook, and we'll try and keep the conversation going from there as well. There is a window for all participants wherever you're logged in to participate by asking questions, and we have our community members ready to get the questions in, and I will be asking them to the panel as and when the questions come. Of course, there's going to be a small window for that. We're going to hand it over to a moderator who is going to take this forward for now. And for our moderator for the evening is Meeta Sengupta. She's a strategist, a researcher, a writer, a coach, and a Catholic. More of her is at meetasengupta.com. And there are several key reasons why she is the most apt and appropriate for moderating today's session. But if I was allowed just one more quirky element, it is this, that she's perhaps the youngest in the room to have gotten to a campus, and she perhaps would have attended lectures very early on in her life, because she spent most of her growing years as a daughter of a professor in the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and therefore reimagining the MBA is also, I think, pretty close to her heart. So over to you, Meeta, and as and when the questions come up and there is going to be an opportune moment, I will chip in with the questions, but until then, over to you.
Thank you so much, IG and Kavi. Welcome to the stellar panel, to the amazing thought leaders and discussants. And thank you very much, all of you who are here participating in our conversation from wherever you are. We are in this multi-way, multilateral world of digital. And I'm hoping that inspires all the change makers of the MBA. It was very kind of you, Kavi, to talk about my deep and abiding passion for the MBA. This is true. I grew up on the IIMA campus when it was all piles of bricks and piles of sand. I have spoken of this to Kiran Karnik on a previous occasion, Ashish Nanda as well. Srikant Datar in our conversations has talked about old professors, Mote, Malya, and of course, Ravi Mathai, and that's brought this conversation sort of full circle. In the sense that we started off with such amazing high ideals for the MBA. And when we look at it now, we look at people who are talking about skilling themselves, really, more of a sort of vocational thing. By the way, those of you who are on Twitter, please, the hashtag for today is hashtag FOMBA. And that reads FOMBA. There's a reason for me choosing the word FOMBA. I'm a Twitter addict. I'm digital all the time. FOMBA, in a way, onomatopically sounds like the bombast of the MBA. Very few people are actually fond of MBA people. You know, we're full of ourselves. We have all the answers. Yes, we have all the answers because we were trained in all the tools. But that's exactly the question I'm going to ask the panel right now. Because the purpose of the MBA was to serve business. The purpose of business, Schumpeter, everybody told us, was to make profits. Srikant Datar, you're the academic guru here. I'm going to come to you first. So when we taught our MBA students, we taught them to serve business. And when we gave them their tools, we gave them the tools of NPV. We gave them the tools of valuation. You are, of course, an accounts guru. So this is everyday basic 101 stuff for you. Did we give them the right tools? Did I receive the right tools? Or did we serve one master when we wanted to serve maybe society, the larger cause, progress? Srikant, the question goes to you and to all the panelists. What is the purpose of the MBA? So I'm going to come to you first, Srikant, and then after that to Nitin, to Ajit, and then Pramath. Please pass the ball along on the purpose of the MBA.
First, thank you very much, Indrajit, and thank you very much, Meeta and Kavi for your kind introductions. It's a true privilege to be with the set of individuals here on the panel, as well as the individuals who helped us earlier. I know many of you, and so, of course, it's fantastic to see you here as well. Of course, a very important question, Meeta, and a very one that we ought to think hard about. And let me tell you, at least when we were working on rethinking the MBA and subsequently thereafter, how at least we thought about the question. And we'll obviously get into what else we could do, what else should we be doing, and so on. So the answer to your question, Meeta, at some point must be tied to the purpose of business. And why do businesses exist? And one must never forget that the businesses exist because they are given the license to operate by society. And why does society give business this license? Why did we say it's a good thing for people to get together to form businesses? And I'm going to use the word business only because the title of our thing is Future of the MBA, but one can broaden that to organizations, is because society believed that giving business this license and organizations this license was good for society. It created important benefits for society that society valued. And if this ever goes in doubt, if ever society believes that that purpose that they gave us the license to operate ought to be taken away, businesses will be in trouble. So I start with the purpose of the MBA must be tied to the purpose of business, which is, as I said, to create good for society. So what should then be the purpose of the MBA? The purpose of the MBA should be to educate leaders who will make a positive difference to society, because businesses operate because society gives them the license to operate. And to do this, what MBA programs need to do, and many have done, and we always are on an ongoing continuous journey to improve, is to create transformational educational experiences for students. As we describe in our book, we broke up what we meant by these transformational educational experiences into 3 categories, and I'm going to actually add a fourth. It was in one of our categories, but I want to emphasize that in the world in which we're living today. But we called it knowing, doing, and being, because unlike other professions like medicine, law, architecture, where the main goal of a professional is to interact with his or her client, the profession of management is different. Managers only succeed if those around them succeed. So it's not an individualistic profession. It's a profession that you get together with other people to do amazing things, as one of our panelists was describing earlier. How do you get ordinary people to do extraordinary things and inspire others to act? And therefore, we always focused on knowing, that is what you need to know in the profession of management, doing, that is actually practicing the profession of management, and then being, which is working with others to make all this happen. Because without being and inspiring others, I think the profession of management doesn't work as well. And so, and what we argued in the book, and I think to some, and schools have made, in my view, definite progress in this area, is that whereas the focus was largely on knowing, we didn't do as much on doing and on being.
So Nitin, who is the doing person on this panel? Nitin, you've been in business all your life. You've been charged with doing. You've been charged with running the operations globally of an organization that is supposed to be for profit, to deliver supply chains across the world. What do you think of this?
First of all, I will of course offer my perspective on this, but I do feel quite intimidated and inadequate with a set of panelists who spend the time.
All of us here, which is why pardon my interruptions when I do.
Who have been educationists, writing of this subject, thinking about it every day. But I cannot re-emphasize what Professor Datar said. It is one of the things that I have felt quite strongly about. And if I was to be a little provocative at this stage, and certainly from my experience and a little different from what I think, Meeta, you said, I don't think when I went through an MBA, I ever sensed or felt that I was being taught genuinely that the purpose of business was essentially to be in service to society. I think business started off like that, but somewhere along the line, business and business schools have lost the narrative. And I think there was a few generations of business leaders who went through business schools being taught one mantra, which was that the purpose of business is shareholder wealth maximization. And I think business got something wrong there. I think wealth maximization is not the purpose of business, it is the outcome of running a great business. And the distinction between purpose and outcome is a very, very important distinction. Purpose of business several hundred years ago was to serve society. And when you did a great job of that, society rewarded you. Yeah. Well, over a period of time, we've got confused between the two. And it is not surprising that society doesn't think of business as positively as it should. If you go down and look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, which ranks how society thinks of different people, politicians, governments, other institutions, businesses. Business and business leaders don't do too well. More than half the people don't think business would take the right decision, which is in the interest of society. More than 60% of the people feel that business no longer acts in the larger interest of societal good. So we have an issue. We have a very significant issue. But I want to come back to the point that you talked about, which was all the models that we were taught, calculating NPV, and is that right or wrong? And I don't think there was anything wrong in what we've taught. I think they're still good and relevant, but it's not enough. Yeah. I think the issues that society is facing today have become far too complex for a very unidimensional assessment of or looking at a choice amongst alternatives based on short-term economic outcomes that you judge from models like that. We somehow have to find a way to be much more nuanced. Many of the issues require sometimes ethical considerations, moral considerations, beyond the obvious financial considerations that you would want to think of. And I don't think business schools today are certainly didn't do when I was growing up and I was in business school, are not doing as good a job as they should be doing to equip the current bench of leaders to come out and be ready to tackle what is a far more complex world that we find ourselves in, with a more holistic set of tools and an arsenal which will equip them.
I have to agree with you in many ways, Nitin, because one of the things that I do is I'm quite passionate about the case study methodology, which again is a Harvard Business School and IMA legacy in a way, and is often misinterpreted. So that gives me an opportunity to meet a lot of business school faculty, especially in the tier 2 schools. And when I go and ask them, other than the top 3 schools in India, when I go and ask them, did you as professors ensure that you taught ethics? Or the ones from the professors from IIM A, B, C say, yes, of course, it was part of what we taught all the time. And the others pretty much turned around and said, no, I don't think we made that happen. And when there's this 4E formula that makes me incredibly popular with these faculty when I talk about empathy, ecosystem, and ethics and emotions, of course. And these are conversations that we have not had in business. I'll come back to you on this one because Ajit spoke of something else that you referred to. Ajit Rangnekar, I'm going to come to you. When we were having our conversation, you said something very interesting about society is now pushing back. And that was really interesting. It in a way refers to what Nitin said, that we've forgotten our purpose. And what business has done has pushed inequity in a way. And society is now pushing back on those values. We were just not good enough in bringing the entire picture into the management of our organizations. Ajit, I'd really love to hear more about this.
Thank you, Meeta. Thank you, Ajit. This is indeed a great pleasure to be with so many wonderful people and most of whom are good friends. So I think let me just take up from where Srikant left off, and he made a beautiful point about business is a license from the society. So if we look from independence onwards till 60s, the license was to build the nation. 60s to 80s was the socialist era, when we said the purpose is to social good and we destroyed profitability in that process. From 90s, we went 180 degrees and emphasized, as a society, we emphasized only profits. Now, what that did is in the last 25 years or so, we, especially we, the middle class, have been the biggest beneficiaries of this globalization and of this release of the industry by the society. Globally, also, the middle class is the one, educated middle class is the one who has benefited over the last 40 years of globalization. In that process, we have got much better, cheaper, wider number of goods. Our salaries have increased, our returns on our investments have increased. We have done extremely well. But in that process, we forgot the poor. We forgot the real society, as we call it. So, and in that process, we also destroyed the environment happily because we were busy making profit. Now, what is happening is that, many of us think that Brexit, Trump, or even Modi are nationalistic movements. I don't think they are. I think they are a demand by those who suffered during globalization now to demand their fair share of the nation. And on top of that, the youth are standing up and saying, wait a minute, you're destroying my future and my environment, and you cannot do that. And that is why I think that we, first of all, before we start reimagining the MBA, we have to look at ourselves. We have been highly materialistic, selfish, and acquisitive for the last 25 years. And we now have to think of changing. And if we have to now think of changing, we have to shift to a model where we have to look at societal business maximization with profit optimization. Reasonable profit, good profit, but not excessive profits. And if we have to do that, if we have to really talk of societal benefit maximization, then who should we be talking to? We should be talking to people not like us. Look at this panel. We are all fellow travelers from, most of us from one institution, maybe two or three, but we are all the educated middle class who have benefited. We know nothing about the society. And yet we are sitting here in our divine judgment, deciding about the future of MBA and higher education. I think the first thing we have to do is to learn humility. And when we do that, we will realize what the real problems of the world are that really need solving. And when we do that, we will also realize that we have to redesign the criteria from profit maximization and only NPV to societal present value. We will have to create new tools to measure societal costs and benefits. We will have to take an integrated systems approach instead of the current functional approach, and so on and so forth. So the development of the new MBA, of the future of the MBA, will first come from our understanding what the society needs are. Now, on top of that, you have to also layer the new changes that have come because of technology, but I'll not talk about that for now.
We will come to that. I'd love to come to Pramath now, because Pramath, you said something that resonates with what Ajit says. Ajit's right. What do we know of the real world? What do we know of the foundations of the real world? But you also talked about foundations in a different sense. That our foundational skills themselves are quite are skewed in a way. We are trained in the world of management and mathematics, but we have not. And Ashoka, of course, is a great example of being a leader of liberal arts in undergraduate education, where you tried to bring higher education and the entire range of learning together. So do you think that is something that should be included in the MBA?
I completely believe that it should be included in MBA. I actually started something which I call a liberal arts MBA. So yes, I think the MBA needs to evolve and change, and I think that's what we are going to talk about. But if you allow me, I'd just like to go back to this discussion that has just happened. I think we are beating up on the poor MBA too much. I sympathize and empathize with the MBA. I don't have an MBA. I joined a management consulting role many years ago, and McKinsey put me through a 4-week crash course, mini MBA, I was a diversified hire, treated in the same category as women and African Americans and Hispanics in North America. I was paid less than the MBA. So I've lived that life. But fast forward to today, I have a new startup. As of yesterday, we have 98 people in that startup. There are 11 people in the top management team. The top management team, and it's a business. It's a business for social good. It's involved in providing education online, kind of foundational skills that you're referring to. Well, we have a founder. I don't have an MBA. I have a CEO. She's a journalist and former writer like Indrajit and Charles. The head of curriculum is another journalist who has a public policy degree from the Lee Kuan Yew School. And I'm just going through the list. My CFO, of course, is a chartered accountant. I have a head of engineering who is a master's in computer science from England. I have a product manager who's worked in many internet companies after he got a BTech. I have a head of HR and administration organization excellence. He's a Young India fellow alum from Ashoka. I have somebody who just is a liberal arts major and used to work at the Center for Policy Research, Center for
Civil Society
Policy in Delhi. I do have 2 MBAs. They are both ISB graduates, which I'm very proud of. This is the face of business today, right? So why put all the burden on the poor MBA, right? I think MBA has become a very high quality pivot for students. Though, as I see it as an educationist or somebody who's involved in setting up programs, the MBA today is the most popular program for you to change tracks. If you were an engineer and you wanted to do something else and not be stuck coding all your life, you go do an MBA. If you were a chartered accountant or a lawyer or a liberal arts major and you wanted to do something else, or a journalist or a, we get people from who are working in hospitality or airlines and they want to go into some other field, they go do an MBA. I think we have to recognize that this is the only degree today or program today that takes in people from very different walks of life, and a postgraduate professional program. You can't do that in law, you can't do that in medicine, you can't do that in economics. But here, anybody can do anything. And that's the power that the MBA has today, where if you believe that you can do anything, that you're going to have a 60-year career, that you want to shift to whatever you want to do in your life one day, this is the way to do it. And that's how I see the purpose of MBA today.
I love your phrase, you can do anything, because that's the kind of self-belief that many of us actually, rightly or wrongly, came out with, saying this. It's our job to take on chaos. It's our job to take on, and that doesn't happen in every MBA, that doesn't happen to every graduate, but it's our job to take on chaos and find order and find purpose in that, and therefore deliver results, deliver for impact. That was the broader, I am completely with you in this one. But again, it's very interesting that you say that you yourself have not been through the MBA program, and yet this reinforces another of my received beliefs, not to my credit, I heard it from somebody, that true disruption can only come from somebody who's outside of the mechanism or establishment, as it were. And I think, and I'm hoping to come to you again and again through the course of this conversation on the various disruptions and, in my mind, improvements to the education system, especially for business, that you've come with. But disruption, again, and has brought with it both opportunities and disappointments. Come COVID, Srikant, come COVID, and all of us are at a moment in time where we suddenly have to take stock of ourselves and the way we deal with the world. And for higher education and for MBAs, from my point of view, I think it's come as a catalyst. It's brought us face to face with the fact that there are some things that we were doing in the classroom that we wanted to do, and we wanted to continue it in the digitalized world. There were other things that we were doing in the classroom that we should never have been doing. And our failures in the digital medium helped us recognize those. Not just that, I mean, that's just the operational aspect of how forced engagement with technology has made us rethink the very process and the tools and the little pedagogical inputs that we use. But also the very design of the MBA comes up as a question again when face-to-face with technology. Would really love your inputs on that.
So thank you again, Amita, and thank you for a fascinating discussion. Let me place this in the context of where I think MBA education, and I agree with many of the comments that there are lots of things we have done well, but it's a process of continually trying to find higher peaks, and I think that's where we are at now. There are three things that I want to kind of emphasize in terms of what the technology shifts that I hope as we get past COVID, we will continue to integrate between what we can do with technology, because I think there are some amazing opportunities for business schools and management education as a result of combining technology with the classroom. So let me go back to what I think are a fundamental area where I hope management education will really pick up, and which is that managers, no matter how much they're educated in management school, and all of us have actually experienced that, Pramath's last set of comments exemplifies that, operate in what I call the gap. And the gap is whatever I know compared to what I need to know in order to make decisions. There is always, no matter what I have studied, when I have studied it, by the time I come to actually thinking about making decisions, there's going to be a gap. And the managers that are able to operate well in the gap are the ones, it's the knowledge, of course, that's important, but then how do you operate in the gap? And these are the kinds of thinking skills that I think Pramath was already alluding to. Nitin was saying something similar. Ajit was pointing to it as well. And we refer to it as three types of very important skills. Critical thinking skills. So how do you pick up on what the most important dimensions are? Integrative thinking skills. How do you listen carefully to different points of view, not get confused, really absorb those points of view and then act? And innovative thinking skills. And if I now think about and then of course, underlying all of this is what Ajit was talking about. One of the first things I do in my course is actually ask my students to spend time with people who earn minimum wage in my design thinking and innovative problem solving class in order to deeply understand them. You cannot lead people you don't deeply understand. And so how do you get them? This is the best time when you're in management school to do it. But all of this is going to happen outside the classroom. This is where technology is going to play a very big role, I believe. I think we now have the opportunity to allow students to be engaged in what I'm calling these being skills, ethics, attitudes, values, understanding other people, connecting with them, while still being engaged with the classroom. So I can easily imagine a lot of fascinating experiential learning opportunities that come as a result of technology. I can imagine innovative thinking that comes in MBA programs today. If I have an entrepreneur who has come up with a great idea, and we know of several fantastic ones from various institutions represented here, if they have an innovative idea, we would tell them, first you finish your MBA, then you can go work on this. Today, we have the opportunity of allowing them to go in the field, connecting to their courses while they are online for periods that they are away, working with individuals that they want to really understand in order to develop it, experiment, prototype, try these things. So I actually think that, I can imagine students going globally to other schools and yet being connected with their own campuses. So as I look at the range of things that we were worrying about, whether it is how do you operate well in the gap, how do you develop these being skills and leadership skills that we care a lot about, connectedness to people, innovation, experiential learning. Meeta, I think technology is going to open up these frontiers, things that we always wanted to do but struggled because of the way the curriculum worked and was designed. I think we now have the opportunity to open it up. So I'm very optimistic about the opportunity.
I'm actually thrilled that you're optimistic. I was listening to you, and for me, it suddenly literally vistas were opening up, and there was a part of me that was saying that that's really not going to happen in so many of the smaller business schools. So those of you who are here in the room today, if you take the lead and make that aspirational, that's I think going to be key. How you actually demonstrate this happening is going to be key. Because in India, I've been to smaller business schools where they still actually have textbooks and school uniforms, and that's a whole other universe. Bringing that universe into this world of interconnectivity, multilateral way of working. In fact, the more complex kind of world that Nitin was talking about, not just for business, but also for within the MBA program. I can't see Indian MBA schools at the present moment, other than maybe ISB, we'll come to you on that, Ajit, actually allowing their students to start a business, whereas it's fairly common at Stanford and your school. You would do all the things that you referred to, but some of this also has to do with engaging with business. Some of this has to do with engaging with business in the way that business wants the MBA to evolve using technology. And Nitin, this is something that was, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking that the world of technology has changed the world of business so dramatically. And we have Piyul here who's an ethnographer, but the kind of inputs that you get about customer behavior, for example, you pretty much know where the eyeballs of the customer have been on shelves, whether they flicked up towards the Colgate toothpaste and flicked away, how many times they went back and forth, how many footsteps back and forth from the aisle. That level of detailed data is information. What we have is technology and how it influences the business. I haven't seen that flow through into the MBA program. And if the MBA serves business, and if the MBA and business are interlocked, as you said earlier, then how do you see this playing out?
So I'm not sure I have an answer, but I will try and share with you some perspective. So that technology will provide unimaginable opportunities for us is a given. It will also bring in its own share of challenges and risks in terms of how we manage it. So it is not simple, as always, and as I mentioned before, it's a complex subject to deal with. How do you harness all the benefits of technology and yet cope with the obvious issues that it is going to throw up? But I'm going to give you some example of how technology can be used, and it might have some relevance to business schools. So firstly, I would say is a lot of what we've spoken about in terms of what business schools must do, the sorts of leaders that we must produce, the curriculum that you need to have, how all of us need to be connected with the society that we are serving. And I think that is absolutely relevant. And I think Ajit Rangnekar made a very good point when he said that just look at all of us. Where is the diversity? Where is the representation of society in this group? And the truth of the matter is that our education system and what we've gone through willy-nilly ends up surfacing to the top profile of a person. And then in our selection processes, we may all think we are super objective, but there's a real risk that our own biases, conscious and unconscious, end up selecting more like us. So I want to just give you an example of what happened in a company. A few years ago, we were deeply concerned that we are not having enough diversity in our intake, not enough diversity in the profile of people whom we get. So after several years of working on a technology solution, we came up with a tool that would allow virtually anyone to apply to the company. To give you a sense, last year we had 1 million people who put in a digital application and a CV. And they went through 3 or 4 rounds of assessment, which analyzed many, many factors, much more than a human being could do, through gamification, through other stuff, 74 different attributes on which you could get assessed and judged. And you progressively went through till you came to a human face-to-face interaction, which was the last round of a one-day event. The point I want to make is that we were just staggered to see the people who's reached the last round of an interview. Till that time, no human being had come in. No one had pre-selected based on which school you came from, which city you came from, what your background was, what your gender was, what your race was, religion was. None of this was built into that model. And automatically we started seeing a very different profile of people who came up for selection. So I do a much more representative set of people. So I think there are many, many interesting ways in which technology could be used. And I wonder whether we would be open enough even in our MBA schools, where I think that our selection tends to be right for yesterday, not right for tomorrow, and certainly not driven to identify individuals who are likely to have a little more empathy, a little more understanding, a little more connectedness with the society that we deal with. And if we could manage that, I think we might have a better chance of creating leaders.
Among the various things that we need to manage, one of our thematic discussions, Piyul, will come up in a few moments and talk about diversity, and that's going to be that's definitely something that's been troubling us. The fact that technology and algorithms are helping us towards that rather than against that, because that's what the evidence on algorithms has been so far. And again, I find it fascinating that you talk about gamification. I mean, gamification of business school cases was something that I did in about 2009, 2010, but we haven't seen that, we haven't seen it become pervasive in proper business schools. It's a part of the online business school concept, which really is on the fringes of the business school. Ajit, you spoke of gamification as part of the potential going forward, but also, and you said it much better than this. You also spoke of the anytime, anywhere MBA, the just-in-time principles of operations management can actually be applied to the delivery of the MBA. And we do have some programs. My favorite one, and this is probably the best 5 minutes of sales that the professor from Deakin, Australia spent with me, is the Deakin MBA, where it is modularized, and you can take about 60 to 80% of it. This was about 2 years ago, so long before the COVID pressures. You can take 60 to 80% of it online, and you do not have to complete it in 2 years. You can do it when you want, as you want. And as long as whatever you've covered, as long as you've covered a few units, you get certification for that element of it, etc. So those are the chopping, changing possibilities that already existed, and yet not pervasive. Where do you see technology taking the MBA?
Okay. Thank you, Meeta. And I must say, I'm absolutely delighted with what leaders are doing. This is truly phenomenal, and congratulations to all of you for doing this. So let's just do a bit of kite flying and thinking, stargazing in the future. I actually think that with 5G and AR, VR, which are around the corner, I think maximum 5 years from now, 5G is going to be all pervasive, and so is AR, VR. That will radically change the way we can deliver education. So it's an enormous opportunity for democratization of education, especially MBA education. So think that supposing I'm a Telugu girl, a girl who has learned only in Telugu sitting in Nizamabad, I will have access to Srikant Datar's program at my home in Nizamabad at the time I choose, in my preferred language at any time, anywhere. And it will be a one-on-one education from Srikant to me. And if I raise my hand, Srikant will pause and says, yes, Ajita, what is your question? I will ask him in Telugu. He will reply in English, which will be translated. I think AR, VR and 5G now offer us a potential for instant transmission, instant translation, and instant two-way communication. And with all top faculty, already Harvard, MIT, Stanford, they are already putting up their best. We will have, and what we are now seeing is actually 1.0. By the time we come to 3.0 version, it will be an order of a magnitude different. So any young person or any person can have access to information. And I think both Srikant mentioned this in the passing. See, we train you for being CEOs. But you don't become CEO when you get out of business school, even ISB. So then by the time you're a CEO, the world has changed. You have forgotten what you've been taught. So I think that we actually have an opportunity to teach people just in time, lifelong learning. And if we now take this even further, just think of it. Maybe the model will be that we perhaps bring them together because networking is important, peer bonding is important, the human connects are important. We maybe bring them together for a year, which is the core and the basics, where we teach them how to look at a problem, how to identify a problem, what are the tools, etc. But after that, they go back. And while they're on their job, so you're mixing experiential learning, industry connect, online this thing, to actually deliver a longer version of the Deacon's MBA. I think there is enormous potential, but it also means that the business schools, especially the second tier and third tier business schools, will have to completely rethink. Because what are their biggest constraints? Faculty and infrastructure and access to industry. All those get taken care of by this. So I'm personally extremely excited. My worry is that a vast number of business schools are not going to take these opportunities, and people like Pramath and others are actually going to occupy this space.
Let's ask him, because the numbers have been amazing, haven't they been, Pramath?
Yeah. But just before we go to Pramath, I think just one other thing which comes closer to the Srikant end of what Srikant was saying. I think while we are also retraining our MBA students to think of broader issues, we also have to find ways that they really understand the use of technology. If you see what happened in 80s and 90s, many CEOs did not understand derivatives and complex financial products. And they were, all kinds of hype was created and they took it, and many of them suffered. One big, large pharma company in India went under, as we know, because of wrong financial products. Today, what's happening is a lot of hocus pocus is being peddled as AI, analytics, blockchain, using really pathetic, wrong, impure data, making all kinds of rubbishy algorithms and peddling it as divine truth. So we also have to find today, in the short term, an ability to equip our students to understand and not get carried away with, oh, this is all based on data and therefore it must be God's answer. Thank you.
So Pramath, the challenge has been thrown to you. Ajit said you're taking over the world.
Business opportunity, I want 10%.
So do we.
They say familiarity breeds contempt. So the way Ajit said, people like Pramath. Nay, jokes apart. What would you like me to actually respond to specifically?
Ajit spoke about access and just in time. I want to talk about the sheer scale that technology can achieve, and the fact that it comes just in time. And I'll tell you where my question is coming from. I'm Ahmedabad. We had our 20th and 25th reunion, and all of us, when we went back, we realized that most of us have had our ups and downs in our careers. And that was the time we were desperate to reconnect with each other, not just with each other, with the roots of what made us who we were, to renew ourselves. We were ready for renewal. We were ready to actually learn a number of things that we laughed off as OB and soft skills in the earlier years. 90% of our batch was engineers. Of course, we didn't have work experience. So many of us didn't really realize how much depth was given to us at that time. Nitin, you spoke, all of you in fact have said that when you become a leader and a CEO much later, you're trained for it way too early. Some of the learning came early, and if it had come later using technology, where it doesn't interrupt our lives, all of us would have loved that ability to reconnect with our literally Guru Jan. We needed that support at that time.
So I would just capture what you said, and this is one of the things I believe about not just the MBA, but all degrees, right? I think that whole notion of a 2-year program or a 1-year program or a 4-year program, a 3-year program is just going to get busted.
Thank you.
And I'm not saying anything that people don't already know, right? And so your MBA becomes it just stretches out, right, to beyond that 2-year. Now, that's like I went through life, right? McKinsey still felt that they needed to give me that 4 weeks, right? Because I was 29 years old and I was an engineering PhD. I didn't understand time value of money. So they said, okay, you got to understand cash flow, right? You need to. So I needed, because, management is still, those of who are in management is a profession. And, it's not just some airy-fairy thing that anybody can do. So obviously you need those core professional requirements that you need to have before you start doing stuff in business and management. So you get that upfront, and then along the way you pick up stuff as you go along, and everybody else, whatever Nitin was saying, Ajit was saying, is absolutely right. It just, the odd thing is that if you look at what I'm doing at Harappa, it's completely remedial. It's a remedial program. I mean, this is stuff that people should have done before.
It's only obvious after the fact, because I think what you've done at Harappa is amazing. It has been transformational, not just for the people who are your audience or your students, but also for those who come in as your faculty. I think that the shift, the kaleidoscopic shift in what a faculty is supposed to deliver is equally valuable to the conversation on progress of the MBA.
Sure.
And I say that, thank you for the opportunity. I taught a couple of modules at the Harappa thing, and I walked in there, and the team sitting there in the room said, no, we don't want anything to do with your knowledge. We've already taught that. That's already there in the modules. We want to talk about how your knowledge worked for you. The experience of it working or not working. And that is actually valuable.
No, absolutely. And, I give you an example from another field. At Ashoka, I'm very excited right now. We just launched something called Ashoka X. We've launched 14 courses taught by people from around the world. The amazing thing is that we have in each of these courses, and this is completely revelation to me because we just kind of threw it out there saying, take a course from Kaushik Basu, Sunil Khilnani, Arvind Subramaniam. I kid you not, we have people who are 16 years old and 65 years old in that same classroom. I have never seen anything like this before. Yesterday, Pratap Bhanu Mehta taught his first course, and I was just sitting there thinking, okay, let's see how this unfolds, right? And there were lawyers in the room, and then there were students studying engineering in the room. And there were so many people who were concerned that, oh my God, how is this going to work? And is it going to be too technical? And will some people drop out? There were 2 people who have complained or not complained, who said, maybe, and I've said, listen, why don't you just stick around, right? This lifelong learning, we don't even understand that how education will actually cater to that, but it's happening as we speak.
For me, to be honest, and I know we have to progress this, IG, I'm very sorry, but this is totally fascinating and meaningful for all of us educators. For me, learning about learning came from the concept of the community college, where, to learn accountancy, a 70-year-old PhD in French would come in, etc. And bringing the learnings, the pedagogical learnings across different, so Montessori learnings into the MBA program, into higher education, community college structures into higher education. I think that is another discussion that probably we should foster. But at this stage, I probably should pause on that, because Baba Prasad has been waiting patiently for a while. And they had an amazing discussion in their breakout group that he chaired, which very much spoke about similar issues. So, Baba Prasad, I'd really like to come to you now and ask you, how do you think we can progress these issues specifically for the Indian MBA?
Thanks, Meeta, for this. We had a very exciting discussion, and today morning's discussion has been very stimulating for me. I'm a Bangalore boy who can drink as much coffee as anybody can, but I'm beginning to feel the lack of a need for stimulants today after hearing this discussion. But anyway, what we did in the breakout session, and a lot of stuff today actually gels with my own background, because like Pramath, I was a master's in computer science, artificial intelligence, who strayed into Wall Street and then came to Wharton to do my PhD. And now I make a living teaching strategy and also consulting with businesses, especially in strategy in a turbulent world. Okay, so a lot of things come together here for me. And as I looked at it, and these were issues that came up in our own discussions, in the breakout, we had two framing questions. Why should the MBA change at all? Okay, why are we engaging in this discussion? So the why of it, and then the what, what should change about it, if it should change. And the why actually was a very interesting and provocative discussion because it led us to talk about the larger ecosystem, which we touched upon today, where we're talking about, well, the companies need MBAs. And so MBA institutions should not be at fault because they're producing exactly what the companies need, which is mercenaries to drive profits. Okay, so that's the thing. Then why should the MBA change? So the chicken and egg problem, in some sense, the industry demands this, and the MBA institutions are producing that. So when we start thinking about that, there is a role for why we need to produce good leaders, because these leaders go into the companies and start to make the changes. So that was one big issue. And the second thing was, when you start thinking about the MBA structure itself, and I want to emphasize the fact here that we talked a lot about how to actually bring that social consciousness that we started today's discussion with into the MBA program. And one of the key things, of course, is to bring in more humanities kind of thinking. Perhaps do humanities, module within the MBA program, so that you start thinking about, as I said, thinking about tragedy, for instance, and how that breeds humility. Thinking about, when you read tragedy, obviously you see a lot of humility coming into the hero or the heroine. And so that kind of stuff makes us humble and think about the larger issues of life. So those kinds of issues could be something that we could push. But again, on the technology front, one of our discussion points was that technology is in some way becoming a substitute for business. Okay, that, today, like Pramath said, most institutions don't have MBAs. They have mostly technology people. You look at Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg doesn't have an MBA. You look at all the big companies today, the technology is really the dominant thing. And so one other thought that I had was it possible for us MBA or business school professors to go into engineering institutions and teach some of these concepts of business and more socially minded business to engineering graduates? So for instance, my own experience in Triple IT Hyderabad, where I taught a course called Technology in the Service of Society, which was all about entrepreneurship, but using technology and thinking about social issues. And that was a remarkably relevant and very, had tremendous interest among the students. So those are kinds of things that I would say we would need to think about.
The Triple IIT is a special place. It's a very special place, very different. And I was thinking when you said take the management to engineering schools, they take the concept of tragedy to engineering schools, and it's half of it is sort of going to be laughed away in the evening Adda session. And that, I think, speaks again to this concept of diversity, because all of our conversations, even the conversation that you have just curated beautifully, and thank you for that, it has been about business and engineering people, about toolkits and technical people. As like you rightly said, businesses are led by technical people. And Nitin just spoke a little. I don't need to go back to him because he's had this amazing, gave us this amazing insight about technology and selection for diversity. Piyul is our first thematic discussant over here. And she was very, very passionate in the breakout groups about selecting for diversity. Now, diversity, by the way, I note, and being a woman MBA, one of the 6% to 10% in our times, I note that when we talk about diversity, nobody spoke about the gender issue. And the gender issue, of course, is and nor did we talk about different abilities, people of different abilities finding their way into the MBA program. Those are issues that we know are real. We know we are working towards it. I personally am very, very strongly against reservation for women in any MBA program. We fought for it bloody hard as everybody else. And I don't want to be seen as a charity case. But the way Piyul speaks of diversity, I think is really, really interesting. And one of my smartest students in my class was a young gentleman on day release from jail. The guy was just on the ball. He got business because he dealt with the real world. In the Slack comments earlier, a professor from Narsimhanji, I think, said that one of the most interesting students was a Jain monk. The monk had such diverse experiences that they brought a lot into the classroom. So Piyul, I'd love to bring you in and hear your thoughts on diversity at this stage.
Just to kind of reiterate what we discussed the other day, one of the big issues I had was with the quality of education from which we are drawing people to come into the MBA. And because it's such a reward and punishment and mark oriented, and everybody's just working in their own little silos in every subject, and I don't believe that from that can come any diversity at all. And I'm just not talking of diversity of gender or class or caste or whatever. I totally agree that, if you had like somebody from the prison or someone like a Jain monk, how do we ensure that we get that sort of people to come in? So Nitin, I hear you that when you say that, there were 1 million people who applied and, after so many layers, you then actually got a far more diverse set of people. But my question is that there are a lot of people out there who would be the perfect fit to resolve the complex issues that tomorrow's, business needs are, but they are not even applying because they don't think that they should be coming here. And if we are here in some way to curate that we get the right people to come into the MBA, then it behooves us to go out and look for those people. And I was talking to IG, and apparently this book was also mentioned on day one. I was talking about the book called Flow by Mihaly, Csikszentmihalyi, where he speaks about people, who have gone through life, who have, full of joy of life. They are the ones who kind of collect experiences. They're intrinsically motivated. They are the kind of people who just get at it and keep doing something. And I'm saying, even while we know that in MBA, it's always those younger 20s who come in, if we keep going to people who just went through that school system of assembly line through, primary, then secondary, high school, and then undergrad, how are we ever going to get people like that to come in? it's going to be impossible. So we have to go out and look for it. So the example, I was taking is the first batch in MICA of, I think, entrepreneur MBA or executive MBA, one of those, around the year 2010. By the time MICA decided to do the course, I think it was already May or June. They had very few weeks left. And then all the faculty was told to go out and get people who have done something significant in a non-marks kind of way. That was it. That was what all the faculty, including me, we were told. And you won't believe it, that single batch, it has been so memorable because they were doing things amazingly. They were doing things, they were back then talking of the greening of Ahmedabad. They were doing all sorts of things which were way ahead of their times. And you know what? None of them wanted to do an MBA. That's why they had not applied to any of the MBA schools. They were located because they were brilliant. Maybe somebody had done excellent drama. Somebody had gone out and, really struggled and worked hard and failed, but was going at it. But we thought that he or she had a lot of inner harmony. And we got people like that. I have one young person who I've asked him to attend today's session. I don't know if he's logged on. I won't take his name. But here is a young person, he went to Xavier's College at the age of 21, just because Vandana Shiva had come to college and given a lecture. He was so interested that he went to a place called Damangaon, which is, between Amravati and Nagpur. And he comes from upper middle class, educated families like us. But he stayed in one room. He told his parents he's going for 2 weeks. He was there for 1 year and he brought 4 villages together and the sort of work he did in those villages. Now, was he trying to do an MBA? Are we getting people? And there are so many young people, like somebody said, not really speaking English, whichever language. Are we getting the right talent in? Because if we don't have the right input in, what is the output that we are going to be getting out of it? It's almost like saying, if I'm in charge of the nation, am I waiting for some people to approach me? Then I'll start cutting through and saying, who do I want? Because it may be a CAT score, it may be some assessment, maybe some algorithm. Or do I care for the future of India? And I'm going to go and look for those people who are there all over and find those gems and bring them together. That was my point.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful. Exactly. I mean, the classic model is input, throughput, output. And you're right. If the input itself is so very siloed in a way, then the output will certainly be impacted by that. Though, of course, they say that when you've selected, we are selecting for excellence. And having selected for excellence in a very siloed way, we will deliver excellence only in that very, very small way. But it's even worse than that. And Nitin, I'm going to come to you because of your life experiences. Every one of our panelists in our discussions, Ajit, you said that, Srikant, you said that, all of you had said that even our teaching and learning has been very, very siloed. So not just the selection, but also our teaching and learning has been in silos. And we are looking for, Ajit, you started off today's discussion with this. What we need is a systemic approach. What we need is multiple lenses and interdisciplinary approach. And all of us have said that. So Nitin, in your experience, and I'm calling on your experience on this, have you thought that your training, firstly, was your training as a generalist or as a specialist? Because what we see in MBA programs today is this tendency to go towards elective. Rishi, I'm going to call on you next. And you know how so many management schools want to pursue electives in the second year. But the idea originally was to create a generalist who becomes a leader eventually. Nitin, were you trained as a generalist or a specialist? And if you started off as a specialist in your work life, then in your experience, did you have to switch roles dramatically and learn new skills? How did it work out?
So, firstly, I would, before answering this question, I would say I think everything that Piyush said I would agree with. And I genuinely feel that you'd be surprised as to how technology and a more connected world gives people access, and the young generation today, and certainly we as a company, don't only recruit MBAs, we cast our net wide, and one filter that we have for looking for people are the people who buy into our purpose, our belief system. What do we want to be as a company? And we find that to be an incredibly powerful tool. And we don't expect everyone to be excited by that. But those who are, then the fitment with what the company wants to do becomes quite strong, and we are able to attract people. And then what technology enables us to do is to reach out much more widely than any human search would manage to connect with. And so that's really the points. I would entirely agree, and we need more of that. But coming back to this point, I don't know what you mean by what was I trained in, because I was a product of the MBA system, which meant the first year would be broadly common, where you did a whole range of subjects. And in the second year, you chose a few more subjects from one field. And you graduated with the assumption that you had become a specialist in that field. I think that is wholly misguided. That,
Thank you.
was just because you've done a few more electives in one field, you become a specialist. The way I think about this is that the MBA course, if it is about using in a short period of time, giving you a sense of all the levers of business, how does value get created, how does it all run, then you do need to have a good understanding of all the different elements which go in, because value gets created through the horizontal integration of all of these things. And if you don't have that understanding, I think you would lose out. That said, while the MBA education would broadly give you a more generalist experience with electives indicating probably the area where you have a deeper interest in and want to spend a little more time in your earlier career, I also feel that the world that we are living in today, or let me put it differently, all companies need some generalists and some specialists. It's not as if you need only generalists or only specialists. That's, I think, point number one. Point number two, I don't think today you can afford to have too many generalists who have no domain understanding, no domain expertise in some field. So as you start working, most people will need to build some domain expertise in a certain area, but with an MBA background, if you've had, it gives you a good ability to relate to that expertise with all the different functions and to stitch it together to understand how business operates and how value gets created. So it's, I think, a simplistic notion to say, should you be a generalist or should you be a specialist? I think you need some domain expertise, but the education of an MBA has to give you a more general understanding of business.
Thank you very, very much. I think that was beautifully expressed. Ajit, I sense you want to comment on this, but I actually want to ask you this a little bit later in the discussion. So, or at least I want to hear you on this, on the silo versus a multidisciplinary approach. But I'll come to that in a bit. For now, Rishi, I think, Rishi, you sit right at the center of this conversation. Rishi, you chaired an absolutely amazing, vibrant session. You brought the debate to a very, both a holistic and a very pragmatic point of view. And I think that was incredible. But you also are the one person who's going to live the experience of the future of the MBA starting, is it tomorrow, when you take over as director of IIM Bangalore, and therefore renew the institute and hopefully our best wishes with you on this, create your very own stamp as an institution builder. So I would love to hear your views, that of your, as chair, of course, but also as an academic and a professional and somebody who's right there on the hot seat.
Yeah, so thank you, Meeta. So I'll be starting my tenure on the 20th of July. So I still have a few weeks to go, but thank you for the good wishes. So let me just try to summarize what our panel felt on this issue. I think almost across the panel, people believed that today businesses change and the environment changes very rapidly. It's unlikely that one set of do's and don'ts is going to be good enough to make your business successful. And therefore, I think the panel felt that you need to be able to both understand as well as define problems before you can actually address them. And therefore, what is very important for the MBA of today is to be able to integrate and to be able to sort of work across disciplines, is to go ahead without preconceived notions, is to be able to look at things with a pretty fresh perspective. And that, of course, connects to what Piyul was telling us earlier about the kind of people we want to come into the MBA program. So I think if I were to summarize it, that's a kind of simple summary of what our group thought.
That's beautiful. And so one of the things that we did in preparation, of course, was the breakout groups. But we also identified 4 themes. We've already discussed 2, one with Piyul on diversity, one with Nitin on the generalist specialist thing. And I'm actually going to ask for 30 seconds more of your time, Rishi, right now. Because one of the things that we've seen across faculty and boards, and you've engaged with a very large number of boards, as has Srikant, etc., they seem to think that the electives are a very popular way of progressing. And yet the sense that I got from the discussions in the group was that electives by themselves are again going to be limiting their the length of the MBA product, the student, each of us, me specifically, for example, in their later careers. So just a very quick thing, what's your view on this?
No, I think Nitin summed it up pretty well. You do need to have some deep domain expertise. It could be in the industry or sector that you're working, or it could be in the function that you're working. Maybe the functional definitions will not be quite what they were earlier. Maybe they will span a little bit more of the supply chain, but I'm sure you will need some number of specialists or domain experts in almost any organization.
Lovely, lovely. Now it's not just us here and the thematic discussants. We also have an amazing audience out there. And Kavi, I think you have a couple of questions from the audience, one for Ajit and one for Nitin, I believe. So would you like to bring them in?
Yes. Thank you, Meeta. I mean, there are lots of questions and we've had a tough time. We've basically looked at what's the element of time available to answer some of these questions that have come up, what kind of, and also looking at the design of what else is coming up. So we just chosen 2 questions for now. And those 2 questions, the first one from Advait. Advait asks, is the Indian MBA too westernized in its context? And that's the question for Ajit. Is the Indian MBA too westernized in its context? That's number 1. And the one for Nitin is this. All businesses will be assessed. This is by Debashish. This is from Debashish Bhattacharya, which asks, all businesses will be assessed by the triple bottom line of profit, people, and planet. Is the current MBA preparing students for this? So these are 2 questions from the group, from our audience on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn and others. So please do keep throwing in your questions, and we'll continue the conversations on Slack, and we'll try and see if we can come back for one more round. Over to you.
Ajit.
Okay, so is that to me? All right, good. So the simple answer is yes. And this is exactly what happened. What was the fundamental expectation then? Global companies were going to, India opened right in early 90s, and global companies thought that they wanted to come and work here, and they wanted people who understood their standards and their way of doing business, but Indian realities. And therefore, you needed a global program which also had integration of Indian, and that was the beginning and genesis of ISB. That's how the whole ISB started. At the same time, Indian companies were going abroad, and they wanted people who understood their way of working and work abroad. So once again, there was a real need from the business world. In that process, what happened was, as I said earlier, we focused far too much on us and on that segment, and we ignored the rest. So therefore, I think now we have to slightly readjust, and it's happening already. See, the markets, Indian markets have opened so much that the kind of globalization that happened, say, 10 or 15 years ago in education is now significantly more Indian. So I think in 2006 or thereabouts, we realized that it was shifting back towards India. And we started creating, I think today we have probably 200 odd Indian cases. So the tools, the methodologies are global. You cannot say that this methodology is Western or Indian. That's the global. But how you apply it and what is now shifting back towards a lot more Indian than it was global. Thank you.
Nitin, the triple bottom line.
I have to first acknowledge that I don't know of the specifics of the current MBA curriculum for me to comment whether that's being taught or not taught. But what I can say based on students which we see is that the conversation around the triple bottom line is absolutely coming up. I think this is becoming more widespread. The assumption that existed is that investors, shareholders, etc., don't get it. I'm beginning to see that globally for certain. There are more funds which are now flowing into companies which recognize this. And that's not because investors are getting soft. They are simply recognizing that companies which don't focus on this combination over a period of time will simply not be future fit. They will not have the societal license to operate, and therefore their future value creation will get compromised. I think I'm beginning to see more and more investors getting that message and are willing to commit funds behind this. So I see that overall. But I think there is more to do between just the intellectual understanding of the relevance of the triple bottom line, which and the translation of all of that into who we recruit, the background of those people, the entire thinking around it, and the shift that we need to make from the primacy of one of the stakeholders, which is the shareholder, to helping people understand that we have to run a multi-stakeholder model where we have to optimize amongst the multiple stakeholders who are around. And it might sound surprising that such an approach, which actually values other stakeholders, might strangely, over a longer period of time, deliver better shareholder returns as well, even though you don't exclusively focus on that. And that's simply because this approach will optimize for the long term. And I think people are beginning to see it. I am not so sure whether business schools today have deeply ingrained this into their curriculum, but the conversation in companies is absolutely there. And I don't just refer to Unilever. I know of many, many companies which are beginning to see the value of this, are increasingly looking for people and making personal commitments to change the way they think about running their business.
That's so well said. I'm not absolutely convinced that business school faculty have a methodology or a way of processing and delivering this to their students. The way companies seem to have adopted them. But I do certainly see a lot of business school faculty who are very committed to, let's use the umbrella term, triple bottom line. They are very, very committed to that, and therefore they engage with those issues in the classroom, not necessarily because it's part of the curriculum, but because they genuinely do care about these issues. And I think it also comes with a sense of ownership.
One comment so that I don't overstate the case of what business has been doing. One of the struggles that we have as a company is that We want people who buy into a philosophy of running a business. We want people who buy into our belief, the purpose of running a business. And yet, as we are looking to see how leaders progress, the tools that we have help us judge the what more easily and the business acumen more easily. And it is only a new skill that we are beginning to find as to how do we identify people who is what I call the inner game, the sense of being, the sense of purpose, they're real drivers for doing what they're doing. How do we judge those guys? How do we make sure that you put those qualities and those on an equal measure compared to the rest? And this is just new space for all of us. So I wouldn't say just business schools have to figure out how to do this. I would say all of us have to find a more balanced way of assessing people and what value is, whether for a business or in an individual.
Which was my first challenge to Srikant early on. Did we give them the right tools? Not going to belabor that, but I really hope that the discussion on that continues long after today's session. But
Meeta, let me just quickly add to just to leave on a much more hopeful note that.
Oh no, we have a lot more to go. We have discussants coming in.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to point out to Nitin's point that there is a lot of work going on around the triple bottom line and what we have to do. So there are courses that are being taught on it. There are faculty members who are being tenured on that basis. And there's a lot of very good research to support what Nitin was saying, that companies that are doing a very good job on ESG kinds of metrics are also the ones that are performing very well. Not the least of which, because of what he said, long-term customers, employees, investors, everyone cares about this a lot. And this is what I mean. The connection with society can never get lost as that starts getting more. And now, of course, Business Roundtable, lots of people are doing it. So I didn't want, Nitin's absolutely correct that we're learning to do it. But I think on this one, I would say that at least many schools are already engaging with this topic in very powerful ways.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, that's the thing. Nitin's inner game that he was talking about and how it connects with the rest of the world. And what you said, the curriculum engaging with society is what Harsh was talking about the classroom. And Harsh is our next thematic discussant. And we've asked him to talk about the entrepreneurship, not just in the sense of a startup investor or somebody who starts a new enterprise, but also entrepreneurship in its holistic sense, where you have a sense of ownership and belonging. You own the planet. You belong and engage with society, and you belong and engage with businesses with an entrepreneurial mindset. Harsh, you have some very interesting ways of doing it in the classroom. You said you actually get rid of all the students or some of the students, send them out into the real world so that they develop this entrepreneurial mindset and they come back with their experiences. Would really love to have your take on this.
Yeah, Meeta, thank you. There's a wonderful discussion that's going on. So let me just give you perspective on, I've been meeting a lot of entrepreneurs, and I'm one myself. When I teach and run one or two businesses of my own, and have been doing it. When I meet these students, one of the problems that I see when I go to the institute and teach this subject called entrepreneurship is being taught as a subject. Now, it is not a subject. It's something. It's a life that you're going to lead for next several years, or maybe more than that, if you choose to become. The question is, why do we need this entrepreneurship mindset to be built in a school? More and more I see that almost 50 to 60% of jobs that have been happening over the last 2-3 years, okay, and I think is going to increase, are coming from firms that have been a startup a couple of years ago, and now they've become mid-size, or some startup that are just 2-3 years old. This is what I'm seeing. And as we go progress in the next couple of years, I think this are bound to be increasing, because the jobs coming from organized large industrial houses are obviously not there. I mean, it's there, but not enough to get everyone on board. So how do we bring this mindset? One of the problems is that when they enter the business school from their trimester 1 onwards, their thinking has been siloed by the way they've been taught the finance, marketing, operation, HR, etc. And by the time they come to their second year where they choose their electives and they choose also entrepreneurship as one of their mindset is already made. So how do we break that mindset? So what we've been doing is a couple of things that experiment we tried, and we found it, successful, is that instead of getting entrepreneurship treated as an elective or as in a particular trimester, we start that whole subject. Now, we don't call it elective at all. It's compulsory for everyone now, okay? That mindset, because we want to build that mindset. We start from the moment they come back after their, summers or internship. They have to go through this whole course for the next 3 trimester, 4, 5, 6, and build in stages their entire business plan. And not only one faculty. I have people from venture capital, I have people from private equity, I have people from operations, I have people from HR. They all come at a particular defined time right through that 1 year and help them to build their business plan. And what we find at the end is a business plan ready to be presented to the investors. So we say, look, it's a credit course, but you have to build an actual, and we want to be evaluated by an investor or people, so that, if should you want to become and what we saw, that several people dropped out of placement and actually went and done this. So that's one way we are trying to build that mindset. But there's another thing that we are trying, which is how do I break that silo mindset of a discipline or a departmental attitude in the year 1. So we launched a course a couple of 3-4 years ago. We call it industry analysis. Right from trimester 2, we say, we'll give you an industry, and the industry will not be a normal industry like an FMCG or auto. These are industries where the data is difficult, like an auto component, glass industry, those kind of industry. You create, as you learn your subjects, you analyze this whole industry based on a value chain that is operational, marketing issues, financial issues, people issues. Okay, and at the end of your trimester 4, you present this again as a credit course to industry experts, we call them. So we don't evaluate. Those experts evaluate each of the project made up of some 8-10 people in that group. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to wean these people away from the silo mindset right from the beginning to help them think more like an integrated approach of multiple discipline that they will eventually be subjected to or be taught. So at the end of 2 years, hopefully a few students will be what we've been talking about. Think of it as integration, because in entrepreneurship, you are neither a marketing guy or a sales guy or a finance guy. I'm wearing different hats all the time.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is what we've been trying to do.
So this student industry connect is absolutely critical, and that is a very neat segue into our 4th thematic discussants issue, and what we have challenged Saikat with right now is the very old issue of industry academia connect. And Harsh, of course, you refer to the industry academia connect. It is that connect for you as faculty. So Saikat, the MBA program is often criticized as not being relevant anymore. And while the excellent schools of business, like the ones represented here, are of course working really hard with their faculty, working with industry, often live, to define and teach as they research, not all business schools are able to create that kind of engagement between academia and industry. Indeed, in fact, the very idea of theory, management theory, is that it studies what has happened in business. And therefore, by that logic, it is always lagging business. Of course, the idea of theory is also to predict forward, and therefore it leads at the same time. But this interlocking of industry and academia has always been a bit of a challenge, with leads and lags and with the relevance being questioned. So what would really love to hear you, Saikat, on how do we make this better?
I think that's a great point. I've been enjoying the conversation as well so much, and these panelists are also friends. And Meeta, you've been masterfully moderating and bringing everybody in. So that's I want to say that at the outset. I think this is a theme that's close to my heart, as well as others who are at the business schools represented here, whether a Wharton or a Harvard or an ISB or an IIM. Now, of course, the very premise, as you allude to, of a business school is that we have an industry academia connect, whether in research or in teaching or in impact, and that has existed. But since we're imagining the future here, I think we can push these boundaries a little further. For me, the mantra has always been, how can we push on that aspiration of rigor and relevance, and that's really something which has been difficult. Part of the challenge lies in the fact of rankings and evaluations of faculty. There's expectation of research, of teaching and service. Balancing those kinds of elements has been a bit of a challenge, and that's an internal problem that may take some time. But I think there are other mechanisms. One thing that I personally like is this idea of co-teaching, for instance, right? So I fondly remember my days doing mine at Stanford, where we had Robert Bergelman, who's a professor, co-teaching with Andy Grove, the legendary then CEO of Intel. And that was very exciting. Other ways to do it have to do perhaps with thinking about how we can leverage the research centers at different institutions. And all of the institutions represented here have made some efforts in that direction. I'll draw on mine, the Mack Institute for Innovation Management, which is the largest research center at Wharton. So the kinds of things we've been pushing ourselves to do is how can we bring rigor and relevance into all facets? So for instance, we are the biggest funder of innovation research at the school and the university. So what we do is we frankly pick those research projects which also have practical relevance and have implications. And we fund them, or we fund them more. Another thing we do is that I actually co-organize a boutique conference on the scholarly side with a colleague. We pick papers that examine the phenomenon very, very closely and don't just look at narrow theoretical questions. We also have programs that work with students, for instance, and industry, because we have corporate partners whom we bring into the mix on solving real live problems. But that's not all. We take data sets, and we encourage companies to give us data sets and we analyze them. But I think even then there's a little bit of a gap. Part of it is that in research, we publish in journals like Strategic Management Journal or say Research Policy or Management Science, which many people here would never have heard of, because that's the esoteric work, if you will. So how can we bridge that? And for example, the case study. The case study is interesting, but it's a forum, a platform for discussion on one company. So we need something in between, because I think in management also the issue is sometimes people try and oversimplify the problem, right? Okay, let me just take some ideas and have 3 rules of thumb. We don't want that either. So for instance, can we do something like white papers? So this is what I've been pushing in my institute as an in-between. So we have topical commentary on themes like AI or blockchain, questions like, do you need it? Not a study that happens on what companies have been doing, but something that identifies, here are the factors to think about. It's not empirically tested yet, but we have some insights. Here are some issues to think about, and we keep augmenting that, right? I think these are some of the ways. Now, who will do all these things and pushing the boundaries of rigor and relevance? Who can experiment? Here's where disruption theory comes in very handy. It could be the incumbents, and I think all of us are making a lot of efforts, but why not have some novel inputs? I think India, which we have not emphasized enough in my view in the conversation today, can take a lead. I mean, after all, by Darwinism, it's the country and the society has been around since 5,000, 7,000 BC, so it's doing something right? So we're doing something right. And why not have Indian business schools? And especially the ones, Meeta, you were talking about, where it doesn't have to be just the top ones, but even the next layer, they can be the creative disruptors here and start pushing the boundaries because they're not beholden by the existing systems and burdened by them, and they can push forward. So for me, it's as much a call to action. Take the lead and have confidence. I want to tell my colleagues of Indian business schools as well, and we will all collectively make it happen, and frankly, we'll all follow suit.
Lovely. You've touched on 2 things that I want to take to the panel next. It's absolutely amazing. One, the idea of creative disruption and creative destruction. And because that was so much an HBS thing that I engaged with in the early 90s, and also the concept of sustainability. Darwin? Okay. But all the questions on sustaining this academy industria connect, I would really like to take that to Ajit and Pramath in a moment. But Nitin, very quickly from you, because you're the fastest respondent. So instead of going to Srikant first, I'm going to come to you quickly. Would these white papers be of use to you in industry? What would you want to see?
So firstly, I was delighted to hear what Saikat was talking about and all the work which is going on. So I'm really pleased. But at the risk of being provocative, I'd like to say that we all get the idea of change, but change is difficult. Yeah, change is difficult for many, many reasons. I think remaining relevant in today's time is a bigger challenge because the pace of change in society is so fast. The half-life of everything is becoming shorter and shorter and shorter. And therefore, what seemed okay in terms of your renewal 5 years ago is simply not good enough today. That's how quickly new models, new stuff, etc. is coming in. I think despite everything that we've heard, the reality is people in general are resistant to change. And in larger organizations like ours, some change gets forced quite because of the much higher level of renewal which happens with more new people coming into the organization. And I think business schools might want to think and assess what is the extent of renewal which will happen in the faculty. And while everyone gets that we need to learn and relearn, how genuinely agile are our mindsets that we are able to shed the models with which we've grown up and adapt and adopt to new stuff which is going in. I see that as a challenge everywhere. I see that in a company. And I suspect business schools will be not immune to this challenge. So I would have a word of caution that we mustn't assume that things are okay and we should be on our guard, because only then is it likely that we will remain relevant, because it is just frenetic, the change which is happening, and in shorter and shorter periods.
So Srikant, you're right in the center of this, Srikant. Harvard Business School is seen to be one of the institutions where things change. You were ahead of the curve when we were talking about reimagining the MBA, and Harvard Business School was also the place where the again Schumpeterian concept of creative discussion was reinvented in 1995. So and this is where we are today all over again. Things have, we've reached that point of destruction. We are in the middle of creating new models. So where do you think this relevance, with rigor of course, will take us? And how do we make it happen?
So, I mean, I think it's always been a very important topic in management education. I think for a large period of time, I think rigor won. It is what got papers published. And so, as we say in Rethinking the MBA, there was a clear concern about whether we are paying as much attention to relevance as we should be. But again, I think things are changing. I mean, if you look at everything that Saikat said, the amount of connect that we are now trying to collectively, not just Harvard or in a business school, but collectively trying to connect to industry, trying to understand their problems. Harvard's always done that because of the case method of instruction that we've done. So we write lots of cases, forces you to be in touch with and in contact with what's happening in the world. But I think as more of that happens, we are also changing the composition of the faculty. So I don't think we're relying as much on PhDs anymore, as Saikat was saying. 20%, more than 20% of our faculty actually come from practice. We have a whole track called Professors of Management Practice where they engage with us. They enrich us a lot in our ability to conceptualize and abstract, and hopefully we help them in trying to think through things in a little different way. We haven't yet gotten to co-teaching as much. I agree with Saikat that that's a very important thing to try and get to next. But we have made some other important changes, Meeta, that actually touch upon many of the topics that we talked about. And I'll just summarize them in 2 or 3 ways. Number one, we talked about diversity. And we have always tried to bring into our class a very diverse class. We're never, for a time, as you might remember, Harvard didn't even look at the GMAT because we were so worried about whether that biases us in a particular direction. We worried about leadership capability and skills and the ability to actually build a class. You don't hire a student, you build a class. You build a class so that you learn from the experience of others. As you know, in the university, we've had people from homeless shelters come in and be part of our group because we know how privileged you are early in your life with the kind of education you get. You're probably also familiar with the famous lawsuit that we were hit with on our arguments around diversity. And we are thrilled that we won that lawsuit because it's so important for us as you're going to think about new ways. If you're going to disrupt, you need people from different perspectives to come together to do it. And then I'll just close with this idea around entrepreneurship and the idea of disrupting the standard way of doing things. So when we start doing courses on design thinking and entrepreneurship and problem framing, these are now embedded courses in the curriculum. It's not the curriculum. We have leadership and corporate accountability. We have entrepreneurship. And that's backed up with what's called the Innovation Lab that we have at Harvard, where there are maker spaces. There's obviously thinking about virtual reality and how you would go about doing that. We're doing joint programs with other parts of the university. So there's a new joint program around data science and management. There's a joint program around life sciences and management. So we were talking about, so this idea of diversity, technology, entrepreneurship, and what it means to be a leader in the world in terms of corporate accountability is very much part of the curriculum. And as I say, we firmly believe that given what the needs are today and how fast things are changing, you have to equip people with the skills of learning how to learn. And if you do not equip them with those skills, that's what I call being in the gap. If you do not equip them with those skills today, I think you do your students a big disservice if you just, that's not to say that you don't want depth, as Nitin was talking about, but we always call it T-shaped individuals, you know, those who are deep in a particular area, but also have the breadth. And that breadth is not just that you understand other functions, but how do you understand and have the capability of operating in a world that is changing quickly. So as I go back to those fundamental skills of critical thinking and integrative thinking and innovative thinking, that's where the curriculum has gone. And therefore, I continue to remain very optimistic about what it is that collectively we will do.
Yeah, please. That was so beautiful. I just want to keep listening to more of this. And I hope, Ajit, that you will bring in more sessions. But Ajit, to you now. In fact, Ajit, Pramath, and in a very, very tiny way, the three of us were associated with the ISB. Pramath, when you were designing the ISB, I was working with at the London Business School and doing the tiny admin work and the research work of starting it. And the idea was to bring in professors of practice. Now, professors of practice is something that has always been a bridge, whichever name you give it, has been a bridge. And yet we find that time and again, or the Sector Skills Council, those were other models that brought that industry connect to the curriculum. Time and again, we find that these models do not sustain, which is why Srikant had brought the concept of creative destruction to you, and you've done that. Ajit, why do you think these models do not sustain? So should we actually be trying to design innovative models that sustain? That's the question to you, Ajit. Or should we be completely happy with sunset on any innovation and then reinventing ourselves again and again?
First and foremost, I think I've always wondered in cricketing terms, what it must feel for a batsman to come to bat after Sachin Tendulkar. Now I'm beginning to understand that. It's not fair to ask somebody to speak after Srikant has.
This is
so
I had to take
anyway,
a moment.
Let me. I think in the Indian context, when we talk of industry, academia connect, there are two aspects of it. One is the industry connect for students, and the other is the industry faculty connect. Ultimately, they all be the same purpose, but there are two different ways because the way we connect. And I think the first thing you have to think of if you're an academic institution is why should the industry want to come to you? What is so special about your students that they still would want to come to you? And if you're not clear about that, then please don't expect the industry. And that is typically what happens. People only focus on bringing the industry, but there is nothing special that you have to give. There is nothing long-term that you have to give. And then over a period of time, it peters down. Right? So how do you build that long-term industry connect? So, when we started, we had exactly the same problem. We were a new school. People thought we were rich kids school. People thought we were an MBA light. We had all kinds of things to face with, right? And all that we kept telling industry was, please come and experience with us. And we were co-built. And I remember the one firm which made a huge difference to us was McKinsey. In 2004, McKinsey partners came. I don't know whether Pramath was a part of that. 6 partners walked into my office and said, look, these are great students, but because we don't get a chance to do summer internship with them, they are not as well trained for our needs as we want it to be. Now, if you're most important, one of your most important buyers, if you like, tells you that, it creates an empty feeling in your stomach. But what McKinsey did was in the subsequent year, they came 10 times and created a new intervention with students where they taught them how to analyze cases, how to make presentations, how to deal with clients and so on and so forth. So that next year when McKinsey came for recruiting, they had a huge group of students ready. In 2007, McKinsey had a different problem. Apparently, they are not allowed to take more than 50% of their full year's cohort from one institution. And they could only take 17 and they had like 26. So what it does is that when you understand that, okay, you have a gap, the company comes and tells you, I have the gap. Again, Srikant talked about the gap, right? How do you help to reduce that gap so that they become industry ready? And if you continue to do that, now obviously today, 10 years or 20 years later, McKinsey doesn't have to do that. They have to do other things, right? So that is one part of it. The second part of it was, we had the same thing when it came to faculty interaction. For faculty, we had all kinds of young faculty, but they were being taught, the students were at the same time being taught by top global faculty. So our pitch to our young faculty was that you interact with Indian industry, we'll help you that connect, create a big knowledge base with those global faculty don't have. So you bring something unique to the class. And that is how we have actually invested a lot of time in going to the industry. We had a group of people whose job was to go to the industry. We created Indian cases so that our faculty then have a long-term ability.
Exactly.
So
And that's the sense of the how that it needs to build. Now, sadly, and this has been such an amazing discussion, and we have Arun Mayaraji over here ready with his summary. I think there's going to be this is I think the beginning of the discussion. This is definitely not the end. So I have absolutely no qualms in leaving it as if it was halfway, which it is. It is not even halfway through this conversation. So at this stage, may I invite Arun Mayaraji for to summarize this discussion so far for all of us. In a way, a proxy for the ending keynote, if you will. We live in digital land, so sometimes it's we copy the real world, sometimes we innovate and create the new one. Arunji.
Thank you very much, Meeta. This has been such a rich discussion with these wonderful minds, great teachers, and yourself conducted it so brilliantly. So I'm feeling challenged. It's like asking the student, you've been into this class, now please tell us what you've learned and we're going to judge you. So guys, please excuse me. You've been so rich in the teaching today and the questions that you put, but I'm going to attempt this. What I've heard is that the MBA has been seen for the last few years as a place in which you're provided tools to get things done efficiently. The word management seems to connote that. Tools to manage efficiently. Whereas what we are saying is that the MBA or the program in an MBA school should orient the students towards the world in a different way than what they are presently getting oriented in the MBA schools, and they should be provided some foundational disciplines. And I heard 4 foundational disciplines. One is ethical reasoning, which is in all religions, it's about your place in society and your place with nature. It's your caring for things outside yourself and not seizing things and being selfish. It's not being rationally self-interested. It's being part of a community and part of nature. So this orientation, and constantly in whatever decisions the students are learning to take, bringing ethical reasoning into what's the point of this decision, who would be benefited by the decision. The second is deep listening, listening to people not like ourselves. We are taught too much in MBA schools as well as other schools to project ourselves, to communicate, to project our brand, speak clearly, convince others. It's not about being quiet and listening, especially to people not like ourselves. And if we have to orient ourselves within a very diverse world, we must learn to listen to people not like ourselves. The third foundational discipline I've heard is systems thinking, which is different to functional, siloed, disciplinary thinking. And the whole of science for the last 300 years has been advancing knowledge through breaking knowledge into parts, into further specializing and knowing more and more, perhaps about less and less, and getting back again to put it all together through systems thinking. The fourth foundational discipline is learning to learn, which has been mentioned many times. And we need students to pick up, not tools to get things done, but an orientation and tools to be able to continue to learn through their lives. And the very powerful theme that is inspiring me that I've been hearing is, what about an Indian model? An Indian model. And I think we've come to the Vivekananda moment, where he went, 1893, to Chicago, not to show that he was as good as people there, but he was different. And there was value found in what he projected, which was about some disciplines in India, ethical disciplines about, again, responsibility for oneself with respect to the world around oneself. Staying with Indian ideas, the Bhagavad Gita says in the 2nd chapter that, your right is to the work and not to the fruits thereof. I mean, it's a great expression of professionalism. Do your work well. That's what your duty is, and that's what you have a right to. What fruits come out of it are not yours. Whereas in business, it's designed to be selfish, to produce wealth for itself. And if an MBA student is going to help a business to produce wealth for itself and thereby also earn more wealth for herself or himself, it is contrary to this Indian teaching, the Gita, which is the wisdom. It's interesting that, this is Chicago again. The business of business should be only business. And that's where Vivekananda went many years ago. But I can see the sense of changing, that the dominance of this idea of business and management is changing. Lastly, learning to learn. We need role models of leaders. And I would say Mahatma Gandhi is probably the best role model I can think of, who a person in action, constantly in life, discovering new methods of producing results which the present methods could not produce. And ethically, not harming others and yet creating goodness for people around. And his whole life he described as his experiments with truth. So what a great example of learning to learn. So these are the thoughts that I picked up, and I've come to now the business schools. I think maybe in the business schools, we are comparing ourselves in India too much with what is being learned in the West and trying to catch up with it. When we talk of best practices, we want to be as good as the best business schools elsewhere and be ranked by the same frameworks to be climbing up those ladders. It's about time, I think, we get the other idea of leadership, the best idea of leadership of Mahatma Gandhi. A leader is she or he who takes the first steps towards something that she or he deeply cares about, and in ways that others then wish to follow. What do we really deeply care about? And let's take the first steps. No one else may have taken those steps. They will be innovative steps, they'll be risky steps, and we will create thereby a new model, which I think the world is also seeking, and India could be creating it, but provided we stop being a slave to present ideas wherever they've come from. And at the moment, yes, we've been taking a lot of them, as some of the discussants today have mentioned, from the West. So those are my summaries, and I do hope my teachers here will say, you haven't learned enough and you better get to work harder. I'll be very happy. Thank you.
Thank you. Truly inspirational. In a way, in the Indian tradition of the satsang, where you encourage, you spend time in the company of good and true people. It's truly been a privilege to talk to all of you today. IG, thank you very much for curating this. Over to you.
I must apologize that we've overshot the time and therefore we've got to close this. But before I do that, let me kind of thank each one of you, our four panelists and the attended panel, for the time and the valuable contribution. I think we'd hoped that this would spark new ideas that could really be applied in the Indian context. I think we've got more than our fair share. As Mr. Myra mentioned in his summary, beautiful evocative summary, that we've got to take the first steps, because at the end of the day, that's what will get us to where we want to go. Founding Fuel is on behalf of the team. I'd like to kind of thank the audience for being patient and sending a whole bunch of questions. We couldn't have possibly, I think, answered all of them, but we do want to continue the dialogue. And that dialogue will continue on Slack. And we'll encourage the panel to also be part of that conversation. So on that note, thank you so much, and this for being a wonderful, kind of set of panelists sharing your ideas freely and working with us in the run-up to this conversation. And I think that was really so much, so worth it, investing that kind of time. Thank you, Meeta, as well, and Kavi, and each of the panelists. Thank you so much.